Jai Guru, everyone.
Jai Guru, everybody. Welcome to minute number 71 of our podcast, Awake, the Life of Yogananda. We do minute by minute. And as I said, we have minute 71. Today with me, Priyank, and also Grace. Grace is here for the second time in a row. How are you doing, Grace, today?
I'm well. Thank you for having me again.
It's our pleasure. It's an interesting minute this time because they go a lot about into what the mind is, what perception is. You have different people speaking on this matter. You have Deepak Chopra, you have George Harrison, and you have what's his first name? I think I forgot.
Andrew
Newberg. Okay, Andrew Newberg, and which is an interesting group of people, and they all talk about that we are basically perceiving things on the outside, and we think this world is so real, and we think Deepak Chopra starts talking about the difference between the subject and the object, and that's an illusion. And then George Harrison talks about that we think we actually live in the brain, but that this is actually also not the case. It's very interesting. And of course, when we hear this as devotees of Yogananda, we kind of say, we've heard this before, right? Like he talks about this in his various books. And one section where he talks about this in a very scientific way is in the Bhagavad Gita. And we took out a section that we can read now together, and then we can discuss that a little bit. Priyank, do you want to start with the first?
Sure. So the Sanskrit word akash, ether or space, derives from towards or gasha, and gasha, to be visible, to appear. Akasha is a subtle background against which everything in the material universe becomes perceptible. Space gives dimension to objects. Ether separates the images, Paramahansa Yogananda said. In the context of the Gita chapter on the field and the knower of the field, it is interesting to note that recent discoveries are leading scientists to an understanding of space that parallels the Akash of Hindu cosmology, a matrix of vibratory forces wherein the world of real particles intersects with a vast sea of virtual particles. Empty space does not appear a very promising subject for study, yet it holds the key to a full understanding of the forces of nature.
So exciting.
Yeah. It reminds me of the whole dark matter paradigm, doesn't it?
Yes. I can't say exactly that I know what dark matter is.
It's this I can tell you a little bit about it. It's this mass of it's this mass in our galaxy and in the universe that we know has to exist, otherwise like the orbits and the mass doesn't add up. So it has to be there, but it's undetectable by this doesn't give off any sort of radiation like other bodies do. So it's this that we call it dark because it's has to be there, but it's imperceptible by any of our instruments, and similarly dark energy. And apparently it's like crazy. It's like what we can, or what we do have, what we can see and detect only makes up for like 5% of what there should be, and the rest is this dark matter and dark energy that we can't detect. And so it's I think in religious terminology and this akasha that we're talking about here, it's very relevant because these are kind of concepts that like science don't really like talk about, but they do, but they don't really add any substance as the scripture here does.
Nice. So it's exciting. We're at the crossroads of science and religion here, right?
Definitely.
Something described in the Bhagavad Gita, and the findings of scientists, they go in the same direction. I like it. Yeah, and with dark matter, that's kind of what I always heard, that mathematically it has to exist, but we've never seen it, right? That's a bit, it's it's great.
Pretty scary actually as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because it could be around us. I mean,
Inside of us.
science calls it dark matter, but obviously that's kind of a negative terminology. Could be very bright, but we
Yeah. Maybe we should call it light matter.
Akasha, perhaps.
Akasha. All right. Let me continue with the next paragraph. It says, when physicists began to study the quantum theory of fields, they discovered a vacuum. They discovered that a vacuum was not at all what it had long appeared to be, just empty space devoid of substance and activity. What might appear to be empty space is a seething ferment of virtual particles. A vacuum is not inert and featureless, but alive with throbbing energy and vitality. A real particle, such as an electron, must always be viewed against this background. The field theories of modern physics force us to abandon the classical distinctions between material particles and the void, writes, oh my God, this name, Fritjof Capra, in the Tao of Physics. Einstein's field theory of gravity and quantum field theory both show that particles cannot be separated from the space surrounding them. On the one hand, they determine the structure of the space, whilst on the other hand, they cannot be regarded as isolated entities, but have to be seen as condensations of continuous field, which is present throughout space. And I find that, oh yeah, go Priyank first.
No, you carry on. I was going to say about electrons.
Yeah, I just find this fascinating because to me, I like the analogy of the canvas, right? I feel like even if you have the blank canvas, there's still the canvas there, right? And it's not nothing. And I feel like that's kind of what we're dealing with here. I mean, it's 3D, a canvas is only 2D, but there is still something there where God can draw on in the background. Yeah,
and minimalism is like this new art, isn't it? And it's the new style that's like in fashion right now, like the minimalist thing. So like a blank canvas with like sometimes like with some most minimal strokes of the paintbrush might actually be classified as like a work of art, which is obviously quite a new paradigm. But an interesting parallel to what you read out here about voids, even electrons. I mean, they mention electrons here, like in physics. Like we think we know what an electron is and like we know where to find one, but at any given time you can only say the probability of an electron being where it is. You can't say that's where it is because it just zooms around so fast around the atom. Yeah, Grace?
Yeah, I think that all of these topics, they're so complex, and physics definitely kind of go over my head at a certain point. But I think this minute flows so nice from the last in that it's the same kind of the theme that modern science hasn't evolved enough to help us interpret, the deep reality and the deep spiritual reality of the nature of creation and all of these things. Like you were saying, Priyank, we can just know the probability of where an electron might be, but not like its precise location. I think these kind of topics, they're inspiring to me in that you realize how limited our knowledge is and how we just see the surface and there's so much complexity beneath that.
Yeah, absolutely. Because with electrons and energy, in terms of electrical energy, we use it so freely, and we think we know everything that there is to know because we can manipulate it so well, but really we can't even isolate a single electron. We can only tell the probability of. So that's it's just an insane concept, isn't it? How little we actually know, let alone things like free electrons that aren't even tied to a particular atom. That's another topic.
Yeah. they're pretty small, to be fair, electrons.
Mm.
I feel like when I went to school, one of the most precise microscopes that you had on the market was like an electron microscope, and I don't want to even say on the market because they cost millions of dollars. and what they do is they shoot electrons at something, and then what comes back paints a picture. But then obviously that doesn't work with electrons themselves because they are too small to be viewed under an electron microscope, obviously. Priya?
Yeah, so that's a classic example of what Deepak Chopra talks about, which is the subject-object split, where like we're trying to on our digital display, we're trying to represent, or on our chart, we're trying to represent what the the nature of the object we're trying to scan, and then he goes on to say where spirituality says that there's a consciousness that includes the subject and the object. So like there's no experiments that are done to like unify everything that's in existence in the experiment. It's usually just a detector here and the object that you're detecting there. People don't look at it as the experiment as like a whole. I suppose in cosmology they do that more than any other, but in small scale experiments that's virtually not thought about. Yeah, Grace?
Yeah, just following off of Deepak Chopra's words, I think that contemplating that idea that there's this consciousness where everything is one, it's a little bit intimidating in the sense because it's hard to understand, I think, from an intellectual perspective, how that works. How am I simultaneously my individual self and one with something else? So I think it's going to be really hard for science to come to, a point of not just being the observer, but also being what's under the microscope. I think that's going to be hard for scientists to not only develop methods to study, but to be able to, go forward with that idea that we're also studying ourselves. And there comes a point where, the object and the subject are one and the same.
And then we're going to come to this in a minute when we talk about the mind, I suppose. But like even the nature of consciousness is just so abstract in scientific thought in terms of its definition, and like even like studying it and trying to like do experiments on consciousness is like virtually a no-goer, isn't it? Yeah, Grace.
Yeah, that's so interesting. Actually, I have to write a paper for one of my classes, and I was wanting to do it on consciousness, and so I started, looking through the literature, and even just reading the Wikipedia page, you see that there's really no consensus about what consciousness is in the scientific, realm, and so I ended up having to abandon that idea just because there's not enough evidence for me to present. Scientists can't even agree on a definition of consciousness right now. And I think it's almost, humorous to consider that consciousness is, what makes us alive, but yet we're not able to study that yet or even define that. But it's the most real part of our existence, and yet it's the most elusive part of our existence. I found that, both interesting but also frustrating. I wanted to learn more about it, and that idea was shattered from the scientific side. Thankfully, I have, Guruji's teachings, and I can go to there, but I don't think my professors would accept just, the theology or the Bhagavad Gita as my source.
One day they will, I'm sure. Interestingly, I remember like crude definitions of like consciousness when I first started reading like religious scripture and like commentaries, and they just said like, oh, consciousness is the proof that the soul exists. And even that didn't really satisfy my curiosity because it's just like linking two abstract things, really, isn't it? Anyway, Mike, sorry I interrupted you.
Yeah, there's multiple points actually. One picture that I really liked that Grace painted was that you are the scientist over the microscope, and you are the scientist and you're also what's under the microscope, which is amazing. And I feel like that's how higher ages science will be, right? You have this understanding from you will have, I think the whole world will move into a more spiritual direction, hopefully, and people will actually have a belief system that kind of supports what we are reading here in the Bhagavad Gita. And it becomes much easier to do science if you actually know what you're looking for. Because the gurus, they do sprinkle like a few hints here and there how the universe works, right? They never go into, I mean, the Bhagavad Gita is probably the most detailed work of spiritual science that I've ever seen, the Yogananda's take on it. And if you use that and you use the whole capacity of our science, I think the progress will just be immense in the shortest amount of time. Yeah, Grace?
Yeah, I liked what you said, Mike, about the gurus will just like sprinkle little hints. Actually, when I was, contemplating this moment in preparation, I loved the idea too that if there's this consciousness where, we're all connected, that from that consciousness, from that place, we'll have the intuition to know how to proceed in science. We'll have the intuition to know how to develop measures to, quantitatively measure and prove even this higher reality. So I like that idea of what you said, like the parallelism between Deepak Chopra's words and your words, that with this, consciousness of being one, will be all possibilities will be open to us, and we'll be able to, progress much further than by the intellect alone. We'll have help, in other words.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I totally believe that. And the whole idea that, like, earlier in the movie, they say somewhere there's a few people who come up and they say we are all one, right? And it's not just that all the humans are one, but we are also one with all the animals, all the objects, all of God's creation, really. It's a really interesting thought, and the more you think it, the more I think it's like it really changes the way of thinking, and a lot of behavior patterns that we have, they don't make any sense in this context, right? Like what the ego wants, how is that important if we're all one? It becomes much less important. The ego is the soul identified with our body, with just one body. But if we are all the bodies, then the whole ego perspective makes much less sense. I guess that's part of our spiritual journey.
Yeah, and in meditation, that's kind of what we're trying to achieve, isn't it? The meditator and the object of meditation, i.e. God in our case, we're trying to bring that consciousness into knowing that we're one. I mean, we are one, but we're dreaming that we're separate. And that's the whole purpose of the meditation. That's probably the link that Deepak Chopra is talking about here. Yeah, Grace?
Yeah, what you were saying about this idea of being one, it triggered my memory that, science is actually starting to get to this point. I've been, reading the research of Barbara Friedrichsen, and she's been doing a lot of research on human connection and how we connect. And actually, it's really interesting when people truly connect on a deeper level, they will have the same like biological processes. Their hearts will be in sync. The same emotions will like roll over their two separate bodies in the same time, which is fascinating because then you really realize, yeah, they're connected. They're mimicking each other's behaviors. Their vagus nerves are firing in the same way, and there's like this connection. So I think that's exciting because even though we talk a lot about how science is limited right now and it can't keep up with the deeper spirituality, it is starting to progress, and we are starting to find like this scientific basis for understanding that we are all connected.
Amazing. Yeah. And I feel like this whole I love that they put this in the movie because they did show a lot of Yogananda and his life, but I feel like they try to intersperse it a lot also with his teachings, right? So they go back and forth. There's an event in his life, there's some of his teachings, and they alternate nicely in that. And let's move on to, so there's Deepak Chopra talking, then you have George Harrison, okay? And George Harrison is actually a character who has appeared in this movie multiple times, and we have gone into his life, his connection with Guruji. There's the famous picture with him and Dayamata, right? That we all know. And we have gone out into George Harrison's lives in a few episodes before. There was one story that I saw. I read about Tom Petty, the musician, when he passed away, that he was actually he had his funeral at Lake Shrine in Los Angeles, which I didn't know. I didn't know he was a follower of Yogananda, which is super interesting. And when I read this article about Tom Petty, it actually said, oh yeah, in that same place, George Harrison had his funeral 16 years earlier. So I'm just adding a random George Harrison story in here, just because I didn't actually know that. I knew that he was a follower. I did not know his funeral was at Lake Shrine. Yeah, Grace?
I want to have my funeral at Lake Shrine. Just putting that out there.
Nice. I think I would agree. I would also want that. I did want to ask you guys, like, do you guys have an opinion on being buried or cremated? Is that something where you kind of feel strongly towards one way or the other? I guess one is more traditionally Christian, the other one is traditionally Hindu, but also has a scientific or a spiritual meaning, the cremation, right? Yeah, Grace?
To be honest, I haven't thought much about it. I'm hoping that that's far in the future for me. But I don't have an opinion on it, but I do know that as I get older, I will definitely be reading what Guruji has to say on the subject.
Yeah, we all hope this is far in the future. Brian?
I don't mind.
You've done.
No, but on a serious note, I don't mind in the sense that when it is, firstly, I don't really mind. It's out beyond our control, isn't it? And secondly, I don't mind if it's a cremation or a burial, because there's a mystical element to this. Because when you accept, or if you really invested in the guru to disciple, connection, then that side of your spiritual, life, Guruji has to take care of, and that's part of the relationship. You're pledging your devotion and your loyalty in terms of the path and the practices and the lifestyle, etc. And in return, Guruji has promised us that he'll take care of these things. So, the science says, in Hindu science, it says, unless you're a realized master, cremation is the best way to deal with the body for reasons we've discussed in the past. But for us, if Guruji is taking us from here to the next place, wherever we need to go, then it wouldn't matter, would it? Which is my main point.
Very wise. Yeah, it's true. If we leave it in Guruji's hand, the right things are going to happen. Let's move on to the next thing, and we're going to talk about the mind. And there's a beautiful article on the is it Sadhguru's website? Yeah,
it is. I went to this because George Harrison talks about thinking that a mind sits somewhere in somewhere in your brain, but really the mind is everywhere. And then this is that concept that he's talking about, the mind being everywhere, is a very Hindu kind of outlook, I suppose, in terms of the philosophy, and we've read some of that out in the Gita, but there's a very deep science to it, and Sadhguru explains it quite well in this article, but it's in other scriptures as well. So there's 4 elements to the mind. There's something called the buddhi, which is basically your intellect, and these words are also used heavily, right now, we would if my wife was to tell me, "Oh, you're not using your brain," she'd say buddhi vapar, which is use your brain, use your intellect. So these words that I'm using are they're everyday for me, everyday words, especially the buddhi one. The second is something called the manas, and man, which is basically the huge silo of memory. So man is something that you again would use for memory in our day-to-day speech. Ahankara, which is the sense of identity, and this is an interesting one. So ahankara, you might separate that, and part of that is hum, and you'll know in the Hong Saw meditation, hum is part of that. So this is your sense of identity. So hum is, we practice this for those who have the technique. It's part of that technique is to realize that what you are, what the hum is in this case, i.e. part and parcel of God. And then there's something called the chitta, and chitta is which is the 4th element of the mind, which is this cosmic intelligence, and that is really what we're trying to connect to in our minds and our brains and our energies when we're meditating. So Grace, do you want to open the mind card and read us some bits about chitta?
Sure. So Sadhguru says, chitta is mind without memory, pure intelligence. This intelligence is like the cosmic intelligence, simply there. Everything happens because of that. In a way, what you call cosmos is a living mind, not in the sense of intellect, but in the sense of chitta. Chitta is the last point of the mind. It connects to the basis of creation within you. It connects you with your consciousness.
So in case you missed it, the words he's using here is intelligence. And remember, the first part of the mind that he said was buddhi, which is intellect. So there's a big difference between intellect and intelligence, which we could debate about as to which one is more valuable. But in this chitta, what we're trying to achieve in meditation, intelligence is the most important thing that we have to develop. Mike?
It reminds me a bit about when Guruji talks about the intelligent life force. I'm not sure if that's the same thing, but we remember the talk that I think it was Brother Prabhupada gave on healing. Brother Saralananda gave it. And where he said basically you just focus energy at a certain body part and it will automatically just heal you because it's intelligent energy. And I feel like this is maybe the same kind of way that this one is intelligent, that it's just you throw it there and it creates creation for you.
Yeah, that's the healing element of it. Yeah, certainly. Well, obviously, healing is just one facet of its capability, or the chitta capability. This is the second part. Mike, do you want to read that out?
Chitta is always on, whether you are awake or asleep. Your intellect comes on and goes off. Many times it fails, even when you're awake. If chitta, or the intelligence within you, was not always on, you could not stay alive. Try to conduct your breath without your intellect. You will go crazy. Chitta is keeping you alive, keeping you going, making life happen. If you touch this dimension of your mind, which is the linking point to one's consciousness, you do not even have to wish for anything. You do not have to dream of anything. The best possible thing that can happen to you will anyway happen.
the best possible thing that can happen to you, what is that, Mike?
I think exactly what is happening.
I was hoping that you would have said Nirvikalpa Samadhi, potentially.
That would be pretty good. But it will happen one day. It will happen one day.
It'll happen.
I think
you sounded like Morpheus. It'll happen when it's supposed to happen. It can happen no other way.
Yeah.
Matrix.
It's exactly like that. Yeah, it's like a wizard does never come late, nor does he come early.
Interestingly, Chitta, Buddhi, Manas, these words, I don't know if you know, but you may know some people are named like with names that are similar to those words. Like Buddha is the name Buddhi and Buddha derived from the same Sanskrit word. And Manu, you may know Manus, and that's from Man or Manas, which is there. And unfortunately for me, my mother-in-law's name is Chetna, and that would derive from Chitta. So she would have some quite a divine sounding origins of the name. So every time I'd say my mother-in-law's name, I'm reaching to that cosmic intelligence that's within her and all of us. So paying her a compliment every time I may refer to my mother-in-law by first name, which we don't. But my point was that Indians and astrologers, when babies are born, they often give a letter designation to what the name should begin with, depending on the stars. So they pick the name which is most conducive for that particular soul's spiritual unfoldment, and then yeah, that name is not usually just any old nice word like you do get these days. It would be quite a profound word, such as Grace. You know, Grace has got a beautiful name. Yeah, Grace, tell us.
What does your name mean, Priyank?
Priya means beloved. So we know that Priya Nath was Sri Yukteswar's name as well. So that's a similar name. My name is Priyank. His name is Priya Nath. And you probably know lots of Priyankas and Priyas, which is all the same derivation. Yes. So let's read a little bit more about Chitta. Touching the dimension of your mind that is pure intelligence, unsullied by memory, unsullied by identification. It is beyond ahamkara, beyond buddhi, beyond judgment, beyond divisions, simply there, just like the intelligence of existence that makes everything happen. If you access this, you do not have to worry about what happens or what does not happen. I'll put a link to this. It's a very lovely article that Sadhguru has written on some pretty profound parts of our scriptures. Yeah, Mike?
Yeah, this is the way the second and the third paragraphs end. Is kind of, you don't have to worry. There is all this stuff out there, but you don't really have to worry about it, because if you do your spiritual work, then you will automatically go in that right direction, and those things will happen for you the way you want them to happen, right? Which is very comforting. So, because I feel like if you go into this kind of science, and I feel like in the next hundreds, thousands of years, we will discover all of that, and yet you can still do all the right things without knowing it, just by doing your spiritual sadhana, I would say.
Indeed. Yeah, because they're quite complex topics. You could get lost in the intellect, and the intellect is not what we wish to develop, it's the intelligence.
Yeah.
Or contrary to what Grace is doing at school right now, and Mike, I suppose, which is developing the intellect. Actually, Sadhguru does talk about this. He said, like, our education systems are principally about developing the intellect, and in classical education in India, that isn't the case. And if you go to a traditional school in India, that's linked to the religious practices, then that is just one element of it. And things like dance, classical dance and classical music, and Indian classical, I mean, and the other arts such as drawing and things like that are very much a big part, just as much an important part of the education in terms of developing your intelligence as is, just learning about science, maths, and English. Yeah, Grace?
Yeah, I definitely sense that lack in at least American schooling systems. When I was growing up, I was homeschooled, and my mom was really good about including art and music and nature into that. And I miss that now that I'm in college. There's just such an emphasis on, what can you do intellectually and learn this math, and it's it's so imbalanced that I miss that balance and that holistic approach to developing myself that American colleges, don't really, they don't make that happen. They don't facilitate that.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. But especially in college, I feel like because you have such a big group of people and you have like one curriculum, and it kind of doesn't leave the kind of creativity for the teacher to actually teach, like bring out what the way that they would actually maybe want to teach this, or maybe I feel like it's college, at least my experience was college was a bit rushed, and they put a lot of stuff. They wanted us to learn a lot of things in a very short time, kind of, and then the quality definitely suffers a bit. And arts and is something that is totally, especially when you study something that is scientific, I feel like there's very little artsy content in there, that which is missed, because I feel like that there would actually be some really interesting insights where arts and science meet.
Interestingly, I had one of my friends is an Indian classical musician, a singer, a Carnataka singer, and if anyone that's done singing training, Indian classical singing training, you'll know that the sounds that are made, like, and where they come from, is very much linked to yoga, and like the resonance that you can achieve through your voice and connecting it to your body. There's quite a lot of spiritual stuff that seems to happen. And he was telling me, Sadhguru told us that music and singing in this way is the most efficient, I think he said, efficient or effective means of spirituality. And I said, I could probably see that, because if you sung with that much devotion, and then you did it like perfectly, like your geometry has to be quite aligned, and in such that it becomes a meditation. And it's quite hard to describe. I don't know if I'm doing a good job, but it's certainly, this element of music is such a big spiritual component of that. And that if you miss out on that, and it doesn't mean that you have to be like this phenomenal musician, it just means that you need to connect with certain like bass sounds. And so some of us that have done practiced the Om technique will know that this is obviously very relevant for our spiritual practices, in terms of the sounds that are within us and within, outside in the cosmos, as it were. I thought I'd just add that. But then I also told this my friend, I said Sadhguru is very capable of telling anyone who's on whatever path they're on that theirs is the most effective and efficient. Because if you've seen any of his interviews, he doesn't go one way or the other. He seems to just like tell each individual what they need to hear for their own growth. So in terms of this minute, and what we're just talking about, I thought it was quite apt that they included the image of like this Chicago sculpture in Chicago, which is called Cloud Gate, or the Bean, apparently Mike told me it's called. I did go there once, and it's interesting because it's a pretty unique, for those podcast listeners, just Google Cloud Gate Chicago or the Bean sculpture, and it's this mirrored bean, as it were, and it's kind of like it portrays like this limitless kind of feel. And the artist, who was a chap called Kapoor, he apparently he wanted to create art that distorted images of the viewer instead of portraying images of its own. So it's a reflective service, and then you see this distorted image of yourself. And as you go up, it kind of like merges with the sky as well. So it blurs the boundary between like what you would say is the limit and the limitless, which is apt. I think the writers did a good job, because that's pretty much what we're talking about in this minute. And apparently the purpose of the sculpture was to invoke immateriality and the spiritual. And as we said, Kapoor is an Indian artist, and he said that his works have no fixed identity, but rather occupy an illusionary space that is consistent with Eastern theologies, as well as Einstein's views on a non-three-dimensional world, which is a cool one. And he wants to explore things such as in-betweenness, which is quite cool. I think all of that's pretty cool, and you would have missed that if you just didn't. If you looked away, you would have missed that sculpture, and that sculpture is quite important for the messages of the movie. It's quite popular, isn't it, Mike? I think I went there once as well.
Yeah, it is very popular. But I remember when I went there, and because it looks so great in pictures and in movies, and then when I actually went there, I found the moment was a bit anticlimactic, because I was like, okay, yeah, there's that thing. Because I feel like its strength isn't seeing that thing in front of you. Its strength is what they do in the movie really well, is seeing it from exactly the right angle, from the right height, on the right kind of day, with the right kind of light, because its strength is really distorting those images. Its strength isn't, oh, you stand in front of this thing and it's so beautiful. And like the way they capture it in the picture, it always looks like you look at Chicago through a portal or through a lens or something like this, right? And this is exactly what you just said, right? It is very much about distorting reality, and it's not about creating like the most beautiful sculpture ever. It is about creating an effect, and that's what the sculpture is all about. And I grown to like it after a while. In the beginning, I went to it and I walked under it like all those people, and I looked up and I saw myself. And I was like, okay, great. Let's have lunch. But then later on, it is actually pretty incredible, and it's a great addition to Chicago. It's well worth it.
It distorted my image of reality so much that I thought it was in Boston. And then Mike quickly corrected me and said, no, brother, it's in Chicago. Fortunately, he corrected me. Otherwise, I would have sounded quite foolish on the podcast.
Priyank, the world traveler, doesn't know anywhere.
Where's the Eiffel Tower again? Is it in Germany? Munich? Is it the Eiffel Tower?
Yes. That's right. It's there. They do Oktoberfest there, yes.
And the Taj Mahal's in Australia, isn't it? Sydney, I believe.
It's in the British Museum.
Okay. Oh, gosh.
This is the end. No more.
No more. Yeah. And the other thing that I wanted to discuss was and it's pertinent to that sculpture, really, because in that sculpture you look from the outside and you see a distorted image of yourself. And that's two ways that people like to see God, really. Some people like to see God in all things, i.e. like the smallest things, and then see divinity in there. And there's others that like to see God from the outside and in, i.e. like if you look at the stars and you're going in that direction from the stars and looking at this wonderful cosmos, then you're looking at the larger picture and then going that way. I just thought I'd put it out there, which one, when you think of God, which way do you go? Or do you go both? Personally, I like to go with the small and infinitesimal, i.e. things like leaves and ants and smallest things that you can't imagine that how they can possibly work, but they do with such precision and harmony, and it can't be for any other reason than the hand of God in it. So I like to do it that way. Yeah, Mike?
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point, because the traditional Christian picture is like God is in the heaven, right? And you stand on earth and you look up, and then you learn about physics and you learn we're on this ball that rotates around another ball, and it's like it becomes difficult to understand the logic behind it. And then Guruji comes and tells us God is in our spine, right? And now it is the opposite for me. Like, it is, when I think of God, I think of something in myself, and it's really hard for me now to, or not hard, it's unintuitive now for me to look out and look at my sofa and say that's also God. Look at a tree, say that's also God. But I should probably do this more, because it's also true, right? It is like all of creation, it's also God. The orange there in my kitchen is also God, right? So it's a different way of thinking. You don't just, because you meditate, you feel peace inside yourself, and that's, I feel like, the association with God that I have, and that the outside is also God is like another layer on top. At least that's how I feel it. Grace?
Yeah, I think I kind of go the opposite way from you guys. I like to kind of conceive of God as like this vastness, and looking up at the stars at night and the moon. And I've been especially taken with just this idea of omnipresence recently. Just thinking of, like, I think it was in a convocation talk by Sister Brahmani, she was mentioning how, the Guru is omnipresent. He's continually present of our every thought, our every feeling. And that's really stuck with me from convocation, just this idea that there's this, once again, bringing us back to Deepak Chopra's words of like this consciousness of oneness. And so I kind of think that I conceive of God as this vastness and this, omnipresence, where you're constantly connected to the omnipresence. It's not as if God's off on some different planet, but it's just vast. And then, I look more into myself to try and understand myself and understand my soul. But I definitely, at least at this point in my life, go with the more vast idea.
Nice.
I remember when I was with this friend, the same friend that I talked about, this musician, and we were out in nature somewhere, and I got my I know we were at some sort of country estate, and I asked the warden guy, I said, "Oh, is there any good trees?" Because it was a really vast nature space. Are there any good trees in here? And he said, "Oh yeah, go to here." And my friends were like, "What are you going to do when you go to those trees?" And then I said, "I've got my app." And I got my app out. He's like, "Why do you have an app on trees?" And I was like, what better app could there be on things such as trees? Come on, look around you. Look how amazing a tree is. And they didn't really buy it. So I had to go around and appreciate the trees all on my own. But there were some pretty cool trees, some sequoia trees as well, some redwoods, which are near you, aren't they, Mike? Anyway, yeah, go on, Mike.
Yeah, they are here indeed. Yeah, trees, especially in the context that we talk about, because they are also life force turning into matter, right? But very slowly. And you can look at a leaf, and in the leaf you can see the structure, and you can go like, why did it grow like this? Why did it grow like that? And it's basically life force kind of finding its own way, creating this tree, which is completely unique, right? There's like, you can have, like humans, you can have trees next to each other. Each one will be slightly different. A slightly different aspects of this life force. Yeah, Grace?
Yeah, I think trees too. I remember learning about this, I think it was last semester for me, that they're also, this idea of unity and idea of oneness, they're really connected with their root systems. And scientists have actually found that they communicate with each other, and they communicate also species to species. So I think it was the Douglas fir trees. They were starting to die from a changing climate, and they sent protective enzymes and messages of warning to, I think it was the ponderosa pine. So it was this communication, and this intelligent communication between different species of trees through their connected root systems. And I think that's fascinating, because it's easy for me to just view plants as they're just plants, but to realize that they're also intelligent beings, and that science is finding that out, that they're able to actually have and share messages with each other, not just compete for resources.
Big shout out to Luther Burbank chapter in the autobiography for those who haven't read that and reread that. My wife was absolutely fixated with that chapter when she reread it for the second time, and she was like, "Oh, I'm going to read all his books." I was like, "Great." But referring to Grace, what you said about trees communicating with each other, I heard a really cool story about that as well in India, where if an elephant will go towards a little patch of forest or a group of trees, and it starts eating one branch of leaves, then apparently, and this has been proven, the trees know, the first tree knows that that's happening. Obviously, it communicates with the other trees, and they change their chemical composition of the leaves and turn them bitter. So then that elephant will be like, okay, no, this patch of trees, I don't want. It's too bitter for me. Then literally the elephant will move on, which is a pretty crazy thought. Mike?
I like that story. I just wanted to say that I feel like plants are like really great for us to study, because I feel like a lot of the stuff that's happening inside plants is all material. It's like, because with animals and humans, they move around all the time, and hence a lot of the energy that flows between animals, communication and stuff, a lot of it happens, I would say, wirelessly, in a different kind of way. Whereas with plants, there is always like a root that you then can inspect and see what's actually going on. You can, like Grace said, there's different enzymes that are being exchanged between trees, there's root networks that are connected. And I feel like plants are in that way a really great way to analyze and research how life is finding its way and how it's communicating.
Yes, I think that brings us to the end of the minute. You had some other card, Mike, didn't you? Do you want to go through that, or we've covered it on
I think we covered it pretty much. Yeah.
Cool. What was that Leo Tolstoy book? I've been meaning to read it, and God of Small Things or something like that. Is it? Am I thinking of Tolstoy? Always been meaning to read it anyway. Listeners, do comment and on those topics. If you remember what that Tolstoy book is that I'm thinking of, that would be good. Grace, thank you for joining us again. It's been
Thank you for having me again.
Lovely having you. And hopefully Chris may or may not be back, in which case we may have to ask Grace to keep stepping in. And then hopefully her grades don't suffer because she's podcasting. Imagine having to tell your supervisor, "Oh, I didn't do my assignment because I was podcasting on the Awake the Life of Yogananda." and then Grace won't be able to even prove it because this episode is released in like 4 or 5 weeks.
I swear I'm on it.
Yes, we can write a reference, Grace, for what it will be worth. All right, we'll see you all next time. Thank you very much, Mike. Lovely minute.
All right. Jai Guru. Thank you all for listening.
Jai Ma.
Jai Guru.